Welcome, everyone. This week, in the middle of Vayikra, it marks the halfway point of our weekly Parsha discussions. And I want to say that our purpose is not to derive Musar and life lessons from the Parsha, which is, of course, very important, but to learn Torah Lishma, which the Maral defines as L'Shem Yediyas HaTorah. So what we try to do here is to pick like different points in the Parsha and try to learn the Pashut Pshat in the Psukim and in the Rashis. I want to thank my good friend and partner Binyamin Sofer, who is the manager, the driving force behind this enterprise. And I want to thank all the hundreds of people that join us every week on the different platforms, on Lakewood Scoop, Matzav, Torah Anytime, and YouTube. And quite a few of them have joined the discussions with emails or in person. We're very, very grateful to you. This week, this year, Pesach, the first day of Pesach and the last day of Pesach, both fall on Shabbos. So there's no Parsha to discuss this week, and the first time we're going to get back to the Parshas is the week after Pesach. So Binyamin suggested that since we're both Einiklach of the Baal Shem Tov, that I should tell the story of the Baal Shem Tov's attempt to travel from Mezhebish to Eretz Yisrael to meet with the Orach Chaim Hakadosh, and the obstacles and the dangers that he faced on the way, and his eventual return to safety on Achron Shel Pesach when he made the Sudas Haidah. And he left the Tzavah for his Einiklach for 10 generations to make the Sudas Haidah every Achron Shel Pesach. I myself am the 9th generation from the Baal Shem Tov, and in our family, we religiously follow this tradition, and we make a Sudas Haidah and Achron Shel Pesach, which we've been doing for almost 300 years. There are a number of versions to this story, as could be expected, for over so many years and so many people telling the story. And some of them are quite fantastical. And I'm going to tell the version that we tell in my family. I once spent Shabbos Bereishis in Kiryat Ata with Rav Shimon Lemberger, the Makavarov. He's a son-in-law of Rav Chuna Halpern, Zechron Levrocha, from London. Rav Chuna Halpern's mother and my father's mother were sisters. They were the daughters of Rav Shmuel Engel, the Radha Mishlerov. So Rav Shimon is a close relative of mine, and I spent a Shabbos with him. It was a very nice Shabbos. And by Shalashudis was taking very long, and when we came past Rabbeinu Tamzman, so he asked me if I would agree to tell the story of the Baal Shem at that Shalashudis. And of course I did, so we were Mavdil, and he brought a tape recorder. In those days, it wasn't that long ago, but they still had tape recorders, and I told the story. And afterwards, Rav Shimon told me that he believes that this version is the most authentic story that he has heard of this story. The story of the Baal Shem Tov, there are many, many stories of Baal Shem Tov. Some are true and some are not true, but this particular story has a very strong tradition which supports it, that is told over and over again for hundreds of years, every single year, so that supports it very much. So we know that this story is true. The only question is exactly what happened in the story. So I'm going to tell you the story the way I heard it from my grandfather, who was nifta over 50 years ago, and he heard it from his shver, that was like another 60 years, and everybody is very careful to tell it exactly the way they heard it. And in a few steps, we're back by Orach of Mezhebish. So I believe this is quite authentic. Before I start the story, I want to give a little bit of biographical information just to set the time. Baal Shem Tov was born in 1698. He gathered a following around him in 1736, and he had two children. One was his daughter Udal. She was born in 1720, and he had a son, Rabbi Tzvi Hersh, who was born in 1734, 14 years later. Udal had two children. One was the Degel Ephraim, Rabbi Chaim Ephraim, who wrote the Degel Machne Ephraim. He was born in 1748. And the other son was Baruch, Baruch of Mezhebish. He was born in 1753. The time this story takes place, the Orach Chaim Hakadosh was born in 1636. He came in Morocco, and he came to Eretz Yisrael in 1741, and he was nifter in 1743. So the story takes place, even though I wasn't told the story with the date. The Orach Chaim Hakadosh came to Eretz Yisrael, and he was nifter the following year. Since the Orach Chaim Hakadosh didn't get to Eretz Yisrael till 1741, and he was nifter in 1743, that places the story in 1742. The Baal Shem Tov always wanted to meet with the Orach Chaim Hakadosh, and he felt that one of them was the nefesh of David HaMelech, the other one was the neshama of David HaMelech, and I don't know which was which. And when two would meet up, they could bring Mashiach. And afterwards, after the story takes place, one time Bashal Ashudis, the Baal Shem Tov said, Kova Ner Maravi. That means the western light was extinguished, and he was referring to the Orach Chaim, and he said the Orach Chaim was nifter. And the reason, and the way he knew this, was because there's a certain side, which is Nizgala only to one person every generation, and this side was Galatim by the Tilas Yadayim of Shal Shudas, so I understood that the Orach Chaim was nifter. And afterwards, they found out that Taki was nifter on that Shabbos. So the Baal Shem Tov in 1742, after the winter, when things got a little bit, the roads became a little bit more passable, set out on a journey to meet with the Orach Chaim Hakadosh. He took along with him his daughter Udal and her husband Rabbi Chiel Ashkenazi, who was called the Deichel. She at this point was 22 years old, and she did not yet have children, so it was just her and her husband were traveling, and his Gabbai Reb Hershel. And they set out with a wagon and horses to travel down from Mezhebish in Ukraine down to get to Istanbul. And from Istanbul, they were going to take a ship to go to Eretz Yisrael. So they traveled down with the horse and buggy, and when they came near Istanbul, they were robbed by highwaymen. They took everything they had, all their valuables, and they came into Istanbul on Erev Pesach, basically having nothing. So they took a room in an inn, and Baal Shem and his Gabbai, they went off to shul. What are they going to do? They went to shul. There's nothing to do. They have to be Saimach on the Rebbeinu Shlenim. And his daughter Udal, they had a few sheets. So she went down to the Bosporus, which is the waterway that cuts through Turkey, and Istanbul sits astride the Bosporus. And she was down there and washing the sheets, and she's crying. And a coach comes by and there's a wealthy man, a Yid, comes out of the coach, and he sees what's apparently a Jewish woman crying. So he asks her, "Why are you crying?" So she told him that it's Erev Pesach. My father is the Baal Shem Tov, who is very famous in the Ukraine and in Poland. And here we're alone, there's nobody here, and we were robbed, that we don't have anything, and Pesach is going to be tonight, that we don't, what are we going to do? So he says, don't worry about it. I'm a wealthy man. I will arrange the whole Pesach in your rooms, but I want one thing. I want that my wife and I should be able to join you for the Seder. So she said, I'm sure my father would agree to that. So he went and he sent the servants, and they got all the dishes and food, and everything was set up magnificently. And the Baal Shem Tov came back from shul, and he saw, and he didn't say anything, and he sat down and he started the Seder. And when he came to Shulchan Orach, he said, Shalom Aleichem to the Yid. He says, thank you very much for what you've done. And he says, I want to give you a bracha. What kind of bracha could I give you? So he said that we have everything that we need. We're very wealthy and a lot of status, but we have no children. So Baal Shem Tov says, I'll give you a bracha. You should have a son. And the following year, he had a son. A year after that. So he heard a Basko, Min HaShamayim, that said that there was a Gzeira, Min HaShamayim, that these people should not have children, and because he gave them the bracha and said the guys because Baruch Makayim, so he lost his chelik in Olam Haba. What Baal Shem Tov said, until now, good. So he lost chelik in Olam Haba, good. He says, until now, I was over this Rabbi al Menashe Kabul Pras. I was doing avodah for a reward. Now I'm going to be over this Rabbi Shloi al Menashe Kabul Pras. So we have to understand what he meant by this, because the Mishnah says that you're not supposed to be over this Rabbi al Menashe Kabul Pras. He's supposed to serve the Rebbeinu Shalom Lishma. So how could it be that that the Baal Shem Tov said that he always was al Menashe Kabul Pras? So back in Pasha Shmini, we discussed the Gemara and Tainis, that you need a pasuk to tell you that a tzaddik gets schar. Keheres Balvan Yishka says that if it wasn't for that pasuk, I would say that, for tzaddik atomi yifrach, if it wasn't for that pasuk, you would say that tzaddik does not get schar. Why would a tzaddik not get schar? A tzaddik doesn't get schar because he wants to do avodah lishma. He doesn't want schar. So the mission that says you should be over this Rabbi Amnas L'Kabel Pras, he shouldn't be Amnas L'Kabel Pras, he should be over Shalom, shouldn't do it for the reward. There's another girsa that Rabbeinu Yoina says that Amnas Shaloi L'Kabel Pras, you don't want the schar, because even if you don't serve the Rebbeinu Shalom Amnas L'Kabel Pras, you know you're going to get a pras. So it has to take away a little bit from your lishma. But even if you do it, you say, I don't want the schar, I reject it, but still you know that you're going to get it, so there's still a little bit of lishma that's taken away. So that little bit of lishma, Baal Shem Tov called that amanas l'kabel pras. So he said, now that there's a gzeira that I don't have Olam Haba, so I'm like that tzaddik in the Gemara that doesn't get schar. He doesn't want schar. He definitely doesn't want schar. So therefore, now I could really be over this rabbi completely lishma. So Baskal came out again and said that because Baal Shem Tov said this, so he got back his chelik in Olam Haba. A Baskal, I'm sure that not everybody sitting at that table heard the Baskal. A Baskal, the Rambam says, is like the lowest level of Nevuah, which even if you're not a Nova, you could have it. So the Baal Shem Tov heard this Baskal, and I don't know who else heard it, but he told over that that's what he heard. So they continued the Seder, and they came to the point where he said, Lois in the floor is gedolis lavadoi, and as soon as he said that, He threw back his head and closed his eyes. And he sat like that, quietly, for a long time. And all the people sitting around the table, nobody moved. Nobody wanted to say anything or do anything. But it went like that for an hour, and for 2 hours, and for 3 hours, just sitting there like in a trance, with his eyes closed, head thrown back. Finally, he picked up his head, and he said, Ki li'olam chazdoi. And he walked over to the window, and he pointed, and he said, Ongeter, which means there he goes. And the people looked out the window, and they saw a man walking in uniform in the street. And then the Baal Shem Tov told them what happened. At that time, in Constantinople, Istanbul, the way they told the story in my family, my Zayda, was Constantinople, because in Russia, I guess they still call it Constantinople. But in Istanbul, the Ottoman Empire, so there was a crown prince, and a young crown prince, who was a boy, and the country and the empire was ruled by his mother, the queen mother, Salia Sabkati. I know this because I researched it. So at that time, according to my research, there was a sultan. His name was Mahmud I. But this sultan, he had no children, and he withdrew from running the government. He used to sit in his own place, and he used to write poetry all day, and he was totally not involved in the government. And when he died in 1753, he was succeeded by his brother, Osman III. And this boy that we're talking about, this crown prince, this is Osman, who was already probably the heir apparent because his brother had no children, he wasn't doing anything, so he was the heir apparent, and his mother was running the country in his name. So the night of Pesach, there was an imam, a Muslim cleric in Istanbul, who was close to the family of the Sultan, of the imperial family. So he came to the house, to the palace, and he said to the queen, tonight is a beautiful night. Let me take the prince out for a drive. So she said, okay, fine, take him. So they got in the carriage, and they went out, and they're riding around, and the imam says to the boy, he says that tonight is the night of Pesach, so let us go visit the Jewish minister. There was, one of the ministers was a Jew, and so let us go visit the minister. So they came to the house of the minister, they knocked on the door, and they opened the door, and the crown prince is there. They were all like, they could invited him in. They didn't know, like, wow, a visit to his house, the crown prince, unbelievable. So he brought him in, and he was in the middle of the Seder, and he sat him down by the table, and they chatted a little bit, and then they got up to go, the imam and the boy. So the Jewish minister said to the crown prince, I want to give you a gift. You came to my house, you did me such a tremendous honor, which I never could have expected. And you came to visit me on the night of Pesach, and I want to give you a gift. But what kind of gift can I give you? Anything I give you. You have, treasure houses full of gold and silver and diamonds and all kinds of things. What can I give you? So he said that the choshev's Yontif by Jewish people is Pesach. And the choshev's part of Pesach is the Seder night. And the choshev's part of the Seder is the Korah. And the choshev's part of the Korah is the 3 matzahs. And the choshev's matzah is the kohen. So he took out the kohen, and he wrapped it in a silk cloth, and he said, I'm giving this to you as my gift. The boy was very excited. He'd never gotten a gift like this. So they left. They're riding in the carriage, and the imam says to the boy, this Jewish minister, he's making fun of you. Look what he did. You're the crown prince, and he gives you a matzah. He gives you just like a flat, dry bread. What did he give you? So he says, really? You think he was making fun of me? He says, absolutely. So the crown prince says, so what should we do? So he says, you give me your signet ring and I will take care of it. I will do something. So he gave it to him. And understandably, the imam was going to make a gzeira against the Eden, expel them or who knows what, and seal it with the seal of the royal seal. So anyway, the boy goes to sleep, and his mother goes in to check on him, and he's not sleeping. So she goes out. She comes back a little bit later, and he's still not sleeping. So she says to him, what's the matter? Why are you not sleeping? So he said, I think I did something wrong tonight. What did you do? He told her the story, what happened, and that he gave the ring to the imam. So she said, oh no, they have a Masorah in the Ottoman Empire by the Turkish, that if you start up with the Yidden, in the end you're going to have a Mapala. So this is a disaster. What did you do? So she called together her ministers, and what are we going to do about this? And they said, why don't we bring this Jewish minister and ask him what he has to say? What is his suggestion? He's a very smart guy, one of our smartest ministers. Let's bring him in and we'll ask him what his advice is. So she said, okay. So they sent a coach with soldiers to get him. They knocked on the door. He opens up the door, and it's two palace guards. So he says, well, what's the matter? He says, come quickly, you are summoned to the palace. He didn't know what this could be. What did he do? Did he insult the crown prince? Did he do something wrong? He didn't know if he's going to come back alive. He didn't know what to do. He said goodbye to his family, and he went with them. And he came into the palace, and immediately fell on the ground, and he said, Your Majesty, I don't know what I did, but I didn't, there was certainly no intention of doing anything wrong, and I'm sorry. So she says to him, no, you didn't do anything wrong, we need your advice. And she told him the story of what happened, and said, what do you suggest we should do? So he said that you should put out a proclamation that the crown prince's ring was lost, and whoever finds it and uses it in any way will be arrested and executed. So so they accepted this, and this averted a very big tragedy. But on the way to the palace, he went in the carriage, and to go home, he lived very far from the palace, so he had to walk home. It was Yantif, and he wanted it, so he walked home. So the Baal Shem Tov, when he pointed to the window and he said, there he goes, he was pointing to the Jewish minister who was walking back from the palace back to his house on the other side of Istanbul. And the Baal Shem Tov had, while he had his head thrown back, was seeing everything that was happening with Ruach HaKodesh. He was seeing everything that was happening, and he was davening and being mispalel and trying to help that disaster should be averted. I just want to say about Ruach HaKodesh that Ruach HaKodesh is not Nevuah. Ruach HaKodesh, it says in the Pesach that when Betzalel, the Rebbeinu Shloim, appointed Betzalel to build the Mishkan, so V'amalei Yosei b'chachma bina v'das. So Rashi says chachma means knowledge, bina means meven dover m'tich dover, and das is Ruach HaKodesh. So why did he need Ruach HaKodesh to build the Mishkan? He was given all the instructions. So the point of Ruach HaKodesh is that the Gemara says that a child before it's born can see from one end of the world to the other. Why is that? How can it see from one end of the world? Because the neshama doesn't see with the eyes. There are many stories of out-of-body experiences where somebody's on the operating table and he dies and the neshama goes up and he sees and then they revive him. But while he was dead, his neshama was in the room and was observing everything that went on. And afterwards, he was able to say everything that went on in the room while he was out, because neshama has the ability to see, and neshama, before it conceived Misof Olam but Sof Olam, there's no limits. It's not like seeing with the eyes, which is limited. The neshama can see everywhere. But what does not allow the neshama to see is the chaimer. The person's gashmias is like a mosach hamavdil. It's a barrier to the vision of the neshama. So when a tzaddik, reaches the point where his neshama is completely dominant over his guf, over his chaimer, over his gashmias, then the neshama has the ability to see. It's a natural ability to see. So that's what Betzalel needed Ruach HaKodesh, that he should be able to see everything with perfect clarity and know exactly what to do and have complete clarity. Ruach HaKodesh, of course, is a basis for Nevuah. You can't have Nevuah unless you have Ruach HaKodesh, but Ruach HaKodesh is not Nevuah. Baal Shem Tov was a very big tzaddik, and we know tzaddikim, even our generation, have Ruach HaKodesh, and he had Ruach HaKodesh, and he was able to see what was going on, and while it was going on, he was mispalel that there should be a Yeshua, and Baruch Hashem, there was a Yeshua, and that's what he said, the Baal Shem was Merachim, and he averted a terrible tragedy. Achalamayid, the family set out on a ship to go to Eretz Yisrael. So to go to Eretz Yisrael, they go through the Dardanelles, which is like the straits between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Then you come out in the Mediterranean Sea, and then you come to Eretz Yisrael. After like a day or so, there was a tremendous storm, and the ship was rocked about. There was like an unbelievable storm, and the ship was shaking and shaking, and everybody was terrified. All the sailors were terrified, and they decided that it's a gzeira. It must be a gzeira. They'd never seen such a storm, so they decided to throw things off the ship. They threw planks and barrels, and they had to. It didn't help. So then they made a goyrel, and they started to throw people off the ship. And they threw, Udal and her husband were thrown off the ship. Udal and Vichil, the Deichel, were thrown off the ship. Baal Shem Tov realized that he was carrying with him the ksovim of his Rebbe, who was a very big Mekubal, Reb Adam Baal Shem, that he learned by him, and he had his ksovim, and he was carrying the ksovim with him. And he understood that Min HaShemayim, those ksovim have to be removed from the world. So he took those ksovim and threw them into the water, and the storm subsided. But the ship was very battered, so they stopped by an island in the Dardanelles, and just to do some basic repairs, try to fix the ship. So they got off the ship, and the Baal Shem and his Gaber Pershel, they went for a walk on the island, and they went into, like there was a bit of a forest there, and they went into the forest, and they were suddenly attacked by, the story is, they were attacked by cannibals. Now, I don't think there were any cannibals in the Greek or the islands or the Dardanelle Islands, but there was some kind of ruchos that took the form of cannibals, and they grabbed them, and they tied them up, and they made a fire, and they were ready, like people like to say, to make a Baal Shem Suda. So Baal Shem said to Herschel, the Gabbai, said to Baal Shem, Rebbe, do something. So he said, I don't know what to do. I've forgotten everything. I just know nothing. So he says, why don't you say something to Herschel? So he said, I also forgot everything. All I remember is the olive base. Oh, the olive base, they said. So let's say the olive base together. So they started saying olive, base, gimel. And then there was a tremendous din of rash, and the cannibals ran away, and they were able to take off the ropes, and they went back to the ship. Came back to the ship. The captain told them that he was able to make some repairs on the ship, but the ship was not seaworthy really, and it could not continue on to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisrael, to Yaffo, wherever they would they would go. So they have to return to Istanbul. So they went back to Istanbul, and they came back on Achron Shel Pesach. And Baal Shem Tov and Perish, and they came off the boat, and they found Udal and her husband were there. They were drying up on by an oven, and so he asked them, "How did you get saved?" So they said that they grabbed onto a plank, and they were floating in the water on a plank, and a Turk came by in a small boat, and he said, "Tandalamai." Now, what is Tandalamai? We don't know exactly what Tandalamai means, but some want to say that in French, Tandalamai means give me your hand. So maybe, I don't know why a Turk would be speaking French to people, in the water. But whatever it means, he said Tandalamai, and he pulled them into the boat, and he brought them back to Istanbul. So the Baal Shem Tov realized that he was not going to get to Eretz Yisrael. In the Shemayim there was Ikov, maybe it wasn't the time for the Geula. So he gave up his plans to go to Eretz Yisrael and returned to Mezhebish. And the Baal Shem Tov made a Suda Seidah for his rescue, that he was Nitzel, and he said that this Suda should be, that he made it every year, and he left a tzavah that all his descendants for 10 generations should make this Suda Seidah every year, which I'm 9th generation, and we make the Suda every single year. And some people say that the reason why he said 10 generations is because by then Mashiach will come. Halavai, Mashiach should come, and we should be zeichet to go to Eretz Yisrael together, Mashiach Tzidkeinu. And that's the story. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and I hope to see you again after Pesach.